Hey everyone, welcome to another live recording of Trump's Trials and Tribulations, New York Trial Dispatch Edition. Today is May 28th, 2024, the day of closing arguments in People versus Trump. I'm Roger Parloff, a senior editor at Lawfare, and I'm here with courts correspondent and legal fellow Anna Bauer, managing editor Tyler McBrien, associate editor Catherine Pompilio, and editor-in-chief Benjamin Wittes. Catherine, a very long time ago, you were arriving at court in the line. Tell us about the line in the scene this morning.
The line was a lot longer today than it was back in April. I greeted my line dude, Kareem, at 6:45 this morning. He was wonderful, gave me a handshake and wished me good luck. The line this time was around the block. Some very familiar faces in the line, but perhaps not a familiar face, but perhaps a little bit jarringly. We dealt with a anti-Semitic protester for a good portion of the morning with a very large sign. He also got into an argument with Andrew Giuliani, who was filming the whole thing. But yeah, it was a long line, but we got in. We made it.
Okay.
But the anti-Semitic protester really brought the line together because I was when I got into court and sat down, I was seated somewhat improbably next to Judge Janine Pirro, who turned to me and said, "So what do you think of that protester?" And we kind of bonded over a mutual distaste for the protester. So, kudos to the anti-Semitic protester for bringing me together with Judge Janine.
It really makes you miss the anti-circumcision protester from
from
the DC arraignment.
No foreskin, no peace.
And what about entourages this morning? What did we have in the entourage situation?
We have first. Oh, sorry, Catherine. Go ahead.
It's okay. I was just gonna say we had a pretty big entourage today. We had Tiffany Trump, Don Jr., Eric Trump, Laura Trump, Tiffany Trump's husband, whose name is escaping me, Alina Habba, Boris Epstein, and a lot of Secret Service with the bulletproof vests underneath the suits, which I was looking at today.
What about prosecutors? We never discussed. Do they get an entourage?
So we actually, though, I think we did have a larger prosecution entourage today in the overflow room, right, Tyler?
That's right. I believe seated where the jury typically sits in the overflow courtroom was, I think, a large contingent of the DA's office. I can't confirm that everyone seated there because it was quite a large group worked for the DA.
They were all DA. I
there you go.
Asked them, and they confirmed that they were a large delegation of prosecutors from the DA's office.
I see a question in the chat about whether Bragg showed up. Bragg was there today. He popped in and out. And actually one of the members of the DA's office mentioned that he thanked Lawfare for the docket that Catherine maintains. So that was a nice shout out.
Oh, that's awesome.
It meant so much to me.
Also, we can't forget the two most important members of the DA's team, America's favorite paralegals, Jaden, Jarmel Schneider, and Georgia Longstreet were there. There's also a third paralegal as well, but he did not testify in the trial. So you've got to wonder how that affects.
No, that's actually the form of being voted off the island in the reality show America's Favorite Paralegal is, did you get to testify? If you didn't testify, I'm sorry, other paralegal, you've been voted out of the wood-paneled courtroom.
Maybe next trial of a former president.
Yes, we should also say the other paralegal for the defense, whose name is, I am drawing a blank on, was also there as well. And we like him, and he can work for Lawfare too.
Yeah, all the paralegals were pro. They all have standing offers to come work for Lawfare.
And just one other point of information. How much of the trial has Bragg been present for? Was this basically it, or has he
No,
shown?
I have seen him at least a couple times before. I think this is, if I had to guess, maybe my third time that I've
Oh,
clocked him. He could
okay,
have been present more though. Maybe Ben or Anna know.
He's been
okay,
there like a few times, but it's not every day.
okay. And then, so Todd Blanche started the morning with Trump's summation, and I gather that Ben may be the only one who remembers it at this point. But what do you recall? Did he do a good job?
So let me start by saying that I actually think he did a better job than anyone else in the room seems to think. I gave him a B plus grade, and I believe Anna and Tyler and Catherine all gave him somewhere in the B minus range. So take this as the Wittes grade inflation. But I thought he was, first of all, I think he's a much better arguer before the jury than he is a questioner of witnesses. He loses the whiny tone to some degree. He is he's fairly polished in this role. He, as with, I'm going to reveal my sort of pro-prosecution bias as a general matter, but generally speaking, most defendants are guilty, and so most defendants have defense lawyers have the harder job in closing arguments, and so defense closing arguments tend to be a mishmash of the technical terms are good points, daggers in between the ribs, and total bullshit. And and look, the defense lawyer's job in summation is very different from the prosecutor's job. Prosecutor's job is to nail down every detail and bring it all home. The defense lawyer's job is to pick somebody in the jury and give that person who you don't know who that is some reason to hesitate, right? And you don't know who that is, and you don't know which spaghetti that you're throwing at the wall is going to stick. And so Todd Blanche had three major arguments that he wanted to get to stick. And they're the same three arguments really that he started with. And they are basically, number one, that the records aren't false, because in fact, Michael Cohen was the personal lawyer for the president, and so a retainer agreement set of payments for him for that service are perfectly legitimate, and therefore there is no record falsification. Number two, to the extent that you don't believe argument number one, you're relying on the testimony of Michael Cohen, who is the technical term that Blanche wants you to use is a lying sack of shit. And you can't count on Michael Cohen for anything. And Michael Cohen,
not to be confused with a crying little shit.
A crying little shit, which
that's a different
thing that applies only to lawyers. But Michael Cohen, a very large portion of the argument is devoted to why you shouldn't believe Michael Cohen. And then a third element is that to the extent that you reject number one and number two, and you believe that there is some underlying record falsification, and you believe this Michael Cohen guy, there is still this election conspiracy theory that the prosecution is promulgating, that this was all done with some malevolent intent to influence the 2016 election unlawfully. And that is false, because election interference, which is what the prosecution calls it, is called electioneering by the defense, and it's as American as apple pie. And everything that the prosecution describes as an election conspiracy is, in the defense's view, a perfectly normal set of interactions between the press, which always has catch and kill operations with political candidates and a political candidate. So that's the parameters of the closing argument. I'm in the minority in the lawfare crew. I thought Blanche delivered it relatively well, and to the extent that it has glaring holes, I think of that as a function of the fact that the substance of the argument has problems rather than the fact that Blanche delivered it badly. But look, if you're asking me who did the better lawyering today, on the whole, I would give Todd Blanche the edge over the prosecution for reasons I'm sure we will get into.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, Roger, I can add in a bit more context of some of the sub arguments, I think, under those three main points. First, I'll say the Cohen is a liar point was threaded throughout everything Blanche talked about today. He never missed an opportunity to hammer on this point that Cohen's a liar. You should not believe anything he says. He's lied under oath. He continued to lie under oath. Everything he did was a lie, essentially. But there were two other, I think, important maybe sub arguments that were in the background that Blanche put forward. First was this Trump was busy argument as president. So, how could he have had this intent if he was so distracted that he was signing checks, he was signing executive orders, whatever, willy-nilly. He had a lot going on. So putting that aside, he didn't touch on that one too much, but it was definitely present. But the second was, I thought, an interesting sort of inversion of one of the prosecution's arguments. That was this whole, if you go with what the prosecution is saying, that this was a reimbursement, then that means Cohen was working for free. And why would someone so self-interested and so money-driven as Cohen work for free? And so that was one of, finally, I think, a plausible or potential, if incomplete, counter narrative that they finally started to offer in closing.
Okay, and of course, the defense had a star witness of their own at trial, Robert Costello. So I assume he was a huge part of their summation as well.
His name was hardly mentioned.
Okay, all right.
He featured more prominently in the prosecution's summation, though that's partly because everybody featured more prominently in the prosecution's summation.
Yeah.
But he was conspicuously not a presence in Blanche's summation.
I just hit Control F to search through my tweet thread for Costello. Looks like he was mentioned twice only in the defense's summation, only to raise the point that he testified that Cohen was suicidal during this very stressful time, this supposed meeting at a hotel with himself and Citron, in which he told Costello that Trump had no knowledge of the payments, supposedly.
Okay. Well, Anna, do you want to take first crack at Joshua Steinglass, the prosecution's summation?
Well, Roger, it's definitely going to be a first crack because it was about 4.5 hours long. Is that right? Or was it longer?
It was longer than that.
Longer.
So there was a lot there, but I will give you the basic gist of it. He started off by kind of responding to a number of the arguments and claims that Todd Blanche had made in his own closing argument. And then he launched into what was, you could tell, the kind of main closing argument that he had prepared for. And whereas the defense had portrayed Cohen's testimony as essential, they said you have to believe Michael Cohen in order to find Trump guilty in this case and to return a conviction. For the prosecution, it was the opposite. The kind of running thread throughout this summation was that you don't have to take Michael Cohen's word for it. Cohen is just kind of a gloss. He's a guy who's there to give you context for all of this mountain of evidence, including documents, emails, phone calls, other witness testimony. All that Cohen does is just give you context for all of these various things. So so that was kind of the main theme. And the way he proceeded to execute that theme was by going through the entire case from 2015. Trump announces his candidacy. There's this Trump Tower meeting between Pecker, Cohen, and Trump, in which they come up with this alleged conspiracy to, publish positive stories about Trump, kill negative stories, and then also publish negative stories about the opponents. And then we go all the way up through Cohen's guilty plea in 2018. We go through the falsified business, the Cohen's, payment to Stormy Daniels in 2016, the reimbursement scheme in 2017, the pressure campaign in 2018 with Costello, and then finally Cohen flips on Trump. We go through all of that, and it takes, hours and hours every single time Josh Steinglass is saying, here's all of the phone records, here's all the text messages. He doesn't even really read them out loud. He just will kind of point to them, I think, so that the jurors will be able to go in deliberations and ask for the documents that are in evidence and be able to examine them. So there definitely was a strategy here. He was trying to be thorough. He even apologized to the jurors at the end and said, I'm sorry for choosing thoroughness over brevity. We only get one shot at this. But there was an element to it all in which it's, losing sight of the forest for the trees, kind of thing, where it all got so detailed and bogged down in focusing on everything that it's almost like you couldn't focus on any one thing and couldn't really parse what was important to the case. And then also, I think the other thing that was lost are just the big thematic moments in the case, or the big thematic kind of things that really tie the case together and that underscore the importance of it to the jurors. And Roger, you've talked before about how one of the risks here, this is an old case, it's a little bit of a weird case maybe, and there might be people who are kind of have more of a jury nullification thing in mind where, maybe they see that the prosecution has met its burden of proof, that there's enough evidence, but they just kind of think, I don't really think this case should have been brought in the first place. And I don't really know if today's closing argument helped any of those jurors who might be on this jury. And of course, the prosecution and defense knows more about the jurors than we do because it's an anonymous jury. They've done research on the jurors, I'm sure, that we haven't done. But at the same time, it just seemed like there really wasn't this, underwriting theme of, this is why the case is important. It felt like Matthew Colangelo in the opening statements really was able to stress this is a case about a conspiracy to influence an election and then a cover up. Whereas it just didn't really quite come through in the Steinglass closing.
Ben, you're gesticulating. Shall I?
No, I think that point is exactly right. Little Matthew Colangelo, who gave this, I thought, almost perfect opening argument that, made all the same points that Steinglass made here, only did it in 10% of the time, and focused on the big themes, and said at the end, and after we present all the evidence, we'll talk again. I think he said, my colleague Josh Steinglass will talk to you again. And what he didn't say is, my colleague Josh Steinglass will bombard you with 5 hours of monologue again, and you'll come out completely overwhelmed. But I really do, look, I don't think any juror is going to go into the deliberations and say, I'm pissed off at Josh Steinglass and therefore I'm going to acquit. That's not going to happen. That's not how jurors behave. But what jurors do is you have, as a prosecutor, a limited number of opportunities to talk to them and to explain the case and to explain the importance of the case to them. And this is your main one. And I think this was a huge strategic miscalculation. It was one of several, in my opinion, over the course of the case. I don't want to overblame, and it may be harmless in the sense that, jurors may go back and appreciate the volume of evidence that they've laid on the table here, in which case, the point is beside the point, or moot, or even I'm wrong, which is fine. But I do think there's a chance that, this was the opportunity to explain to three jurors why the case matters, instead of throwing a huge amount of information at them over the course of really 6 hours. And I do worry a little bit that Mr. Steinglass passed that opportunity up.
In fairness to this guy, I was reading Tyler's and Anna's tweet threads, and for a long while I was thinking, wow, this is a brilliant guy. I mean, it's just gem after gem after gem.
Any given 15 minutes of it was terrific. And I do think the first
hour
was
great.
And I realized that he had miscalculated. It was at the first break. He was terrific. I mean, it was probably 90 minutes of argument. He had really shredded Blanche's a lot of his arguments. And then the judge calls for a recess or a brief break and asks him, how much longer do you think you have? And he says, I'm about a third of the way in. And the entire tone of the press room just changed on a dime. It went from everybody being riveted by him to everybody being angry at him, because you feel totally differently about 90 minutes of argument if you think you're near the end of it than if you feel like you're a third of like you have two more segments of 90 minutes of argument. And I can only imagine, the press corps at some level is there by choice. The jurors are not there by choice. And I can only imagine from a jury point of view what it's like. They didn't hear that. They had been dismissed already. But to realize that you're in the middle of a filibuster rather than that you're at the peak or the culmination of an argument. And so a lot of this point is non-substantive. I mean, any given 20 minutes of that argument were brilliant. And some of them I experienced the brilliance of it, and some of them I was tuned out or angry at him for, and so didn't experience the brilliance, but I'm sure it was brilliant. But you stack together enough 20-minute segments of brilliance and you have an infuriated audience.
Tyler? But I just want to stress, though, I don't think it matters. And I think Ben agrees. Like, I really don't think that, unless it's the kind of thing that I was talking about where maybe the work that didn't get done that needed to be done was telling the story of, the severity of this, the seriousness of the crime, how it relates to the election. Those things got a little bit lost. But beyond that, I don't think that it's going to make or break the case that Josh Steinglass bored the jurors out of their minds for 4 hours because he was hitting them over the head with all the evidence.
Yeah, I guess I agree with that. And a few words, I think, in support of him is that it seemed like though he gave the jury all the tools they would need to convict, he gave them, too much. He gave them the same tool over and over and over. But the first hour was, I thought, brilliant. This the election conspiracy became this sort of refrain in a positive way. You know, he was driving home that all of this was done in service of this conspiracy to promote or prevent, an elected office through unlawful means. Here are the unlawful means. He brought it home every time, and he kind of intoned this. And in so doing, I think, as Anna was hinting at, he elevated this case. He elevated his argument, up from the seedy hush money details to the election interference case that they've been trying to portray it as this whole time. He, at some points he claimed that our very democracy is at stake here. The Access Hollywood tape, and the suppressing the Daniel story could very well have been the thing that elected Donald Trump. I think he had these nice, like, dramatic flourishes, but again, a lot of those did get lost after just the weight of detail and evidence and scale, and retracing the same timeline 3 times over in different ways, repackaging evidence several times over. But I think, to Anna's point, maybe that doesn't matter. Like, he gave them the tools. He often would specifically call out exhibit numbers and encourage the jury to ask for those exhibits so they can listen to them again, so they can turn up the volume on the recording clip, and really get the most out of it. So I think overall, I agree with what Ben and Anna were saying.
I will also I'll give the jurors some credit as well. For the most part, for what I saw, they seemed pretty engaged. Mid-afternoon, I saw some of them taking notes. Nobody was sleeping. And it wasn't only until the very end that I saw some people, looking at the time, or some people were sweating a little bit. But I also will remind everybody that it was the jurors who made the decision to go this long. Mershon gave them the choice to send everybody home, but they wanted to get through the rest of this today. So yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. And just to be clear, if you're Josh Steinglass and you make the strategic judgment that the comment that Anna quoted earlier reflects, which is to choose comprehensiveness over brevity, you may make the argument, as a journalist leaned over to me and said, the jury must really hate him right now. You may make the argument, the jury's going to hate me Wednesday night, but or Tuesday night, but Wednesday morning they're going to come in and they're going to have everything they need in their hands, and they're going to do the right thing. And, that's a win. And so I'm not saying he made the wrong judgment. I'm really not. I'm saying he made a judgment that surprised me a great deal, and that is, from a trial advocacy point of view, a bit atypical.
And also it's a bit atypical that Justice Mershon even let them go on for as long as they did. A lot of judges would just say, you've got 90 minutes.
I think toward the end, I think he was beginning to do an intervention.
So Steinglass definitely stretched the patience of the judge. And that's an interesting, Justice Mershon at one point even ruled against him on a matter, I won't go into the details, that he had previously ruled for him. And when Steinglass kind of argued the point, Justice Mershon said very candidly, look, I agree with my prior ruling, but 4.5 hours into this argument, I think you've said enough. So, just for those in the audience who think this is Ben Wittes, theater critic, I think Justice Mershon was very much with me in surprise at the aggressiveness of the argument.
I will also add, there's someone in the chat who mentioned this, and I saw some talk about this today, that there's some reporting that one juror seemed annoyed and not attentive, and someone in the chat has said that seemed worrisome for a hung jury situation. I have no idea who people are talking about with respect to this juror. There is one juror who often looks kind of bored, but that's just the juror's face. I actually, Tyler and Catherine helped me out here if you've noticed something else, but I also just think there's nothing that you can really tell from in individual facial expressions that a person is making, on the jury. It really does not provide a whole lot of insight into what the entire jury is thinking as a collective group. It has to be unanimous if they're going to return a conviction or an acquittal. And I really think that people just shouldn't, read too much into facial expressions of individual jurors.
One last thing I wanted to, I thought he did a good job of working in not just documents, but the other witnesses. There were, 20 witnesses, and I thought Hope Hicks seemed to end up as a pretty important witness. And McConney he used well. But I'm just reading it in tweets. Being there, were these important? The sense I got was it wasn't all Michael Cohen. There were some key corroborating voices as well as documents.
So one thing Steinglass did exceptionally well, and I'm glad you mentioned this, is really bring in the whole richness of the case that, Andrew Weissman on his podcast and in his writing has been stressing the importance of Exhibit 36, which is the notes of the Alan Weisselberg and Jeff McConney. My secret belief, which I've said everywhere I, get asked, is that the key witness is in fact Jeff McConney, not Michael Cohen. He did a very nice job fleshing out the different witnesses who contributed important pieces of information, who are not saddled with the problems that Michael Cohen has, and who present information that Trump simply cannot account for. And, that's
It looks like they froze, but if I could also
that
add,
aspect of his argument was to the jury.
I'd also just add quickly that Steinglass called these two documents smoking guns, and to back up to Blanche's summation, it seemed like the only argument they gave to discredit these documents was that if this represented fraud, then why didn't they destroy them? Why did they save them? Which struck me as, I think the correct term is weak sauce. It was just it didn't land.
Well, we're almost out of time. Catherine, can you tell us what happens tomorrow? And then also tell us what will the verdict be?
If only, Roger. So tomorrow we're back at 10 a.m. and Mershon will give the jury its instructions. So that is the part where, as Ben hinted at earlier, that Steinglass was going into at the end of his summation, and Mershon said, "Stop that, that's my job." So the jury will get its instructions and specific definitions of what they're looking for in terms of what they're trying to find Trump, or what they're deciding Trump did or did not do. And then we wait. And we'll see. I have no idea when or if there will be a verdict.
Okay. Well, we will leave it there. Anna Bauer, Tyler McBrien, Catherine Pompilio, and Benjamin Wittes, thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for watching. If you want to support Lawfare's coverage of the Trump trials and watch this dispatch without ads next time, become a Lawfare material supporter at lawfaremedia.org/support. Well, I guess we won't necessarily see you tomorrow, but we might. And it's been grand.